What started as a hobby catching and collecting bugs quickly turned into the most successful video game franchise in the world. The first Pokemon game's release in 1996, it became an immediate success. Over the years, hundreds of millions of copies have flown off the shelves, and the franchise continues to build a dedicated fan base known for their enthusiasm for the Pokemon world. However, despite its popularity, the Pokemon series, like any video game franchise, is no stranger to some form of criticism. Depending on the title or generation released, some are definitely worse than others. The biggest criticism has been the repetitive, simplistic nature that always follows a predetermined path. The announcement of Scarlet and Violet quickly grabbed the attention of even those who haven't returned to a Pokemon title in years. After only a few short days of hitting the shelves, the game seemed to effortlessly break the record of the fastest selling console exclusive game ever. Unfortunately, despite its success in sales, it was no secret that the games had issues that led many to even demand a refund for their purchase. But were these games really that bad? In this video, we're going to hopefully find the answer to that question by going through a very in-depth analysis of the game, and I'll be giving a rating based on my overall experience that I had. This is my first ever review, so I don't think IGN will be offering me a job anytime soon. There's going to be spoilers. I've dedicated a section at the very end for that, but along the way you might find footage of areas, characters, and Pokemon, maybe a cutscene that you might want to avoid seeing if you haven't already played the game. Proceed at your own caution. Scarlet and Violet's biggest strength lies within its massive open world that gives you the freedom to forge your own path. Whatever you want to take on first is entirely up to you. It's an adventure filled with possibility where you can pursue anything that catches your attention, as opposed to being stuck to a predetermined path. Not long after leaving your house, you're introduced to your new rival/friend Nemona, who is definitely an improvement from previous games. I was prepared to hate her because of my past experiences with rivals. Maybe it was just me, but I couldn't stand Hop. Anytime he would just breathe, it would upset me. But Nemona has this charm to her. She's the character who can't read social cues, even if her life depends on it. She's got a one-track mind for battling Pokemon, and before I knew it, I was sold on this character. I even found that when she didn't show up to the places that you expect her to, I was disappointed. And at that point, I was like, oh god, what have I become? The tutorial itself feels like a much faster pace than previous titles. Not long after taking your first few steps on a long journey, you get a taste of what's to come in your adventure. Instead of sitting through annoying dialogue that keeps you from doing the thing that you came here to do, which is catching Pokemon, in my opinion, this tutorial has a good balance between introducing new characters to giving you just enough freedom to keep yourself entertained until your journey officially begins. This was a breath of fresh air from Arceus, where right from the beginning you're introduced to the new way of catching Pokemon, and then they ruin your life with countless dialogue boxes for the 45-minute long opening. The minute you leave the academy, the massive world finally opens up and the true potential of the game begins. Unlike Sword and Shield, you now have access to 3 different story paths to take on, and this was something I was overly eager about because I think the Pokemon universe is filled with untapped potential when it comes to the storyline of the games. If you've ever taken the time to watch the anime, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. You can tackle the 8 gym leaders in Victory Road, challenge massive Titan Pokemon in Path of Legends, or wage war against Gen 9's villainous team in Starfall Street, each with their own unique characters and story to follow. What's cool about this is that you can take on any of these challenges at any time. I remember I went to take on one of the Path of Legends Titans, and the Pokemon was a much higher level than me. I watched my team drop like flies until I eventually lucked out and froze the opponent for the remainder of the battle. Pure luck, zero skill, but it was a hell of a time. While you do have the freedom to choose what you want to do, it does feel like it's in your best interest to do these in order based on level, otherwise you end up taking down a really low-level gym leader, and at that point it's one of the most boring battles in the game. I think in this case a scaling system would have made sense. To be honest, that's kind of what I expected before going into the game, until I ventured into an area with Pokemon that had a significantly higher level than me. I just think about how cool it would have been to take on the Bug Gym Leader at level 50 and face off against Pokemon matching that level. Or even slightly higher, instead of them being level 12, and depending on the level, they add new Pokemon to their roster. So if it was 3 Pokemon before, it's now 5 or 6. Or even Pokemon in the wild, scaling as time goes on. That way you really could go wherever you wanted to go and catch the Pokemon that you're looking to get. I think it just would have been a different experience. Now you may not be sold on this idea, but these are just my thoughts. Pokemon has always been a game that I've been very passionate about. Because of that, sometimes I can put a little too much fire in what I'm saying. I don't mean fire like in a good thing, I just mean I talk a lot, you know. Because of this, the freedom in the game still feels somewhat restricted. I will say that while it's great to see Game Freak adding more storylines to the game, when you really break these down, it's not much of a difference from doing Victory Road. Because everybody gives you a gym badge. For a Pokemon game, it makes sense, but when I do Path of Legends, it feels kind of weird, like Arvin handmade these badges just to tell you, good job, little buddy. It makes me feel like I'm back in school and get a gold star or participation trophy. All you really end up doing is collecting badges and fighting stronger enemies as you progress. And I just kind of wish that they maybe built this up a little bit more. With 400 different Pokemon to catch, I found myself constantly getting distracted from the original goal that I set for myself. When you enter a new area and it's filled with Pokemon that you've yet to encounter, very easy to get carried away. It starts with catching, and then the next thing you know, you're on the opposite side of the map. Even when you return to an area that you've out-leveled, you find items that you missed the first time around. Or maybe even a few rare Pokemon spawn that you haven't seen yet. Now, when you are out exploring, it really feels like this world's brought to life. You'll find Psyduck splashing around in the water, Tarantula hanging from a tree, or Fletchling soaring through the sky. Sometimes they're even just taking a nap, and it feels real. These Pokemon do something other than just stand around and wait for you to catch them. Sometimes it's weird how they just randomly spawn on screen, but that's a whole nother issue. I definitely would have liked to see the updated catching method like Arceus, because coming from that to the standard weaken the Pokemon and then attempt to catch it, or even in the event of finding a shiny Pokemon and you end up throwing the controller at the wall because you just destroyed it. Terastalization adds much more strategy to combat. Terastalizing in battle causes a Pokemon to transform to its specified Tera type. What makes this really interesting is that if you can find a fire-type Pokemon with a water Tera type, with that, its weakness is going to change with it as well. So in an example, if you were to find an Eevee with a water Tera type, it's going to go from being a normal type to a water. This also means that if the Pokemon uses a move that matches its Tera type, it's going to be even more powerful. While I wasn't a huge fan of turning Eevee into a big crystal, the ability to change your Pokemon's typing made this experience so much better than I originally anticipated. But at this point, I was more interested in testing out the new raid battles. Immediately after starting my first raid battle, I noticed the improvement to the flow of battle. I no longer needed to sit and wait for my other team members to attack before I was able to make a move. Now, having Pokemon that can change their Tera type actually makes these battles much more exciting, because let's say you're joining a water Tera type battle, and so you send in your good pal Sprigatito. If you don't pay attention to what Pokemon has that Tera type, it can leave your poor kitty with a good burn, literally. I made that mistake and ended up facing off against a fire-type Pokemon with a water Tera type, and by sending in the Grass Cat Sprigatito, I basically sent him to an early grave. Because despite being a water Tera type and weak to grass attacks, that Pokemon still had fire moves. They've also made some much-needed improvements to the AIs that you join up with. In the past, you'd get Pokemon like Magikarp to splash around, or Pokemon that would heal you despite having already full health. Now it feels like they're definitely more efficient. Depending on the difficulty of the battle, you might need to find real players to help you out, but in most cases, using the AI is perfectly fine. Something strange about this as well, though, is if you're using the AIs, once your Pokemon is defeated, the entire battle comes to a stop, and they wait until you revive before continuing. But as long as you are alive, if other Pokemon faint, the battle still flows. The problem with this is that the timer continues to go down without any damage being done to the Pokemon. At the start of the game, it's not something to be too concerned about, but as you start to get to higher star raid battles, it gets really frustrating, because in a higher stakes battle, every second counts. And every single time your Pokemon faints, you have to wait that much longer to come back into battle. The next thing on this list is the textures. Characters in Paldea and the Pokemon have never looked better. Fluffy Pokemon look fluffy. Metallic Pokemon look metallic. Now, while this looks good, there's some areas that looks like it came from Nintendo 64. When grinding in the game, you have a few different options to choose from. You can tackle a bunch of raid battles to get as many XP candies as you can, or you can stick to that standard approach to battle that many of us are used to. But in Scarlet and Violet, they added another system in place that was useful in more ways than one, the Let's Go command. This allows the first Pokemon in your party to auto-battle wild Pokemon, but this doesn't give you the same amount of XP as a standard battle would. Which honestly I think is a great decision to make when implementing a feature like this, because auto-battles are decided within seconds. You can battle a high volume of Pokemon in a short amount of time. With that, it could lead to a broken leveling system because you can achieve an insanely high level in a fraction of the time. This plays a big role in Starfall Street, which I think takes a pretty unique approach compared to the other paths. You face off against a horde of Pokemon and send in the first 3 party members. From there, you have 10 minutes to take down Team Star's Pokemon before you get to finally face off against the leader of the base. This was also useful when gathering materials from Pokemon in order to craft some of the TMs from the Technical Machine. I don't think I've ever seen a more creative name than that in a video game, but through league points and the materials that you gather from Pokemon, you can craft different TMs. What's cool about this as well is when you discover a TM in the world, this is automatically added to your crafting list, and through the right materials and a few league points, you can craft as many as you want. One issue with this is often you get TMs, but they don't really tell you what items you need if you haven't discovered it. You end up having to play guess who until you find the right material. I love crafting in games like this, but this kind of feels a little more boring because you're limited to only crafting TMs. I would have loved to have been able to gather materials for potions, battle items, or Pokeballs. You're gathering herbs, berries, or whatever else you need to grab. It just gives you more to do in an open world. Even in games like Breath of the Wild, you can spend a ridiculous amount of time gathering resources. Arceus had a pretty good crafting system in place, and this kind of feels like a downgrade. Personally, I don't use TMs that much because I'm an underachiever in this game, so I only use this from time to time. The character creation process is the best it's ever been in a Pokemon title. There are a ton of options that you can pick and choose from, allowing you to make a truly unique trainer that can resemble whatever vision that you have for your trainer. But for some reason, you are limited to only 4 skin tone options. It's safe to say that the same love and attention was not given to the clothing options. Through your long journey, you are limited to only 4 uniform options, so the days where you can buy different hoodies, jeans, and t-shirts are long gone. My understanding, this is due to the theme of the game where the character is a student at either Naranja or Uva Academy. While you do have options to buy items like socks, shoes, hats, gloves, that sort of thing, it doesn't really feel like it makes up for turning you into an orange or a grape for the next 50 hours. This may not be important for some out there, but there's definitely people that are feeling that throat punch from Game Freak. If these were done a little better, or you had more uniform options, I think that this might have improved this. But at the same time, I'd like to think that people belonging to prestigious academies in real life don't wear their uniforms while not in school. Now that that's out of the way, it's time to address the elephant in the room. Scarlet and Violet have had some technical issues that definitely need to be pointed out. Some are pretty minor, like clipping and invisible Pokemon, while others were much more serious, like heavy frame rate drops or the game crashing. Nothing's worse than buying a brand new game and having it crash on you. For me, I can't say I had a horrible experience with this. It started when I met Koraidon, and you could see his foot going through the floor. Not a big deal. But then there's a scene in the academy where it looks like these kids are robots trying to figure out how to be human but haven't yet mastered movement. A lot of the times you see things like this in towns where NPCs struggle to exist until you get closer to them, but I don't know. For me, I just kind of laughed it off because despite its flaws, I definitely didn't struggle to beat this game. I could go on and on about this, but if you have been on the internet since the game launched, you've probably seen your fair share of issues, so at this point I think I'd just be beating a dead horse. Okay, so I'm going to finish things off by talking about the storyline of the game, so if you haven't played the game and ignored my first warning, here's the next one. Pokemon Scarlet and Violet to me was different from any other title. While a big part of the game was about reaching the champion rank, this wasn't the sole focus of the game. It wasn't about the badges you accumulate, but rather the bonds that you made through the key characters in the game. While my first encounter with Arven had my blood boiling through his attitude, Path of Legends sent me on an emotional journey after discovering Arven's true motives. He would sacrifice anything in order to save the life of his lifelong companion Mabostiv, who was injured in one of the most dangerous areas in the game, Area 0. I have never had so much motivation to push through a story in a Pokemon title, but I can't help but think just how much more this would have hit home if these scenes had voice acting. While I definitely enjoyed Starfall Street, I did have some issues with it. Everywhere you look, this team is referred to as Gen 9's villainous team, and the way that they're introduced makes you believe so. But as you take down the major players of the game, Team Star hits you with their origin story, and it was nothing like I ever expected. Team Star started because they were bullied in school and came together from a common enemy. As I continued down this path, honestly, I lost my motivation to continue with Operation Starfall because after discovering their origin story, it felt like I was the bad guy. The so-called villains of the game were people that were bullied at the academy, and the bonds that they formed together through Team Star was their treasure, and by taking down each boss, it felt like my treasure hunt was to take away their own, or what was most precious to them. In the end, they put together a happy ending where they all reunite and continue their bond, but this happiness felt like it came at a cost. Because this group was also important to people that followed them, and I just took that all away. I don't hate the story, but each game seems to push further and further away from the villains of the game. We lost Team Rocket, Magma, Aqua, and we ended up with Team Yell or Team Star. And the result was no clear villain in the game. Even as you make your way to the final boss, you definitely can't hate the Sada and Turo robots. They really have no control over their actions, and they even warn you before you start. I do understand that different regions call for a new team, but I would just love to see a true villainous team in Pokemon games. If you look to the anime, there's always some form of adversary, whether it's Jesse and James from Team Rocket or Giovanni, the man calling the shots from behind the scenes, and I can't help but think how this would affect the show by removing these characters entirely. On a positive note, Area 0 was great. For a while, it felt like a different game with 3 other party members joining up with you, and you team up with each of them individually as you encounter Paradox Pokemon. Their personalities really come out as they interact with each other. For a quiet kid, Penny was a bit of a savage, but over time the characters all seemed to warm up to each other and form some serious bonds. I didn't notice the text at the bottom of the screen for a while, so I missed out on some of the conversation, and again, this is the perfect time for voice acting. Overall, this was a title that had me glued to the screen until I beat the game. While the games do have their share of cons, the open world, wide range of Pokemon, and well-written cast of characters make them worth checking out for fans of the series, especially if you can get past some of the technical issues in the game. Based on everything that we've talked about in this video, I'll be honest, I struggled to give this game a score. Some people will say it's the worst game they've ever played, and to those people I say Balan Wonderworld. If you can find something in this game that's worse than Foxbox, I would be shocked. I would say that this game is a 6.5 out of 10 because despite having so much to offer, I can't overlook the performance issues, poor textures, and more. If this was no longer an issue, it would definitely affect the score of the game. While I did have a lot of fun, I'm not going to lie and say it's an absolutely flawless experience. At the same time, I can't discredit all the things that the game does well, from its storyline, improved animations, raid battles, and soundtrack. The thing is, we all have different experiences in this game. Each person that watches this video or another review video has something different that they have to bring to the table, something that they had, something they liked, something they disliked, and this is just my version of that. Take it with a grain of salt because I'm just a guy who makes videos for fun. Let me know your experience in the comment section below. Maybe you have some things you love or things you hate that wasn't covered here, or maybe you disagree entirely. Either way, I'd love to see what you have to say. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.